Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Marosha and today we are making a candle cake. So a cake that looks like a candle that you can actually light like a mini candle on the top of, like a birthday candle, but you stick it in. And then it looks like the cake is a candle. So I did mine for kind of Halloween time, but you can do it for Christmas time too. They look really cool for Christmas time. And they also look cool for birthdays and all sorts. So how I'm decorating it is I'm using Swiss meringue buttercream. So I just made a few small cakes up, just vanilla cakes, some basic sponge cake basically, and I'm going to decorate them with some buttercream. And then we'll do a chocolate ganache that kind of drips down the cake and looks like a candle, and we kind of carve out the center to make the cake look like it's a kind of melting. So we need to start with egg whites in our glass bowl or in a bowl that's safe to go on top of the hob. Well, on top of a saucepan on the hob. So we start with the egg. So we need, let me check. So we need 5 egg whites. And you can save the yolks to do something else with maybe. And then you're going to need to whisk that with 300 grams of white sugar. So you could use caster or granulated, it doesn't really matter. And also a pinch of salt. My scales are a tad broken, so they're a subject to kind of not working. You have to really make sure it's completely dry and but yeah. So 5 egg whites, 300 grams granulated sugar is what I'm using. And then we'll whisk that up. And you want to get the bowl on a saucepan on the hob. That obviously it doesn't touch the water that you've got underneath it. So you kind of got the boiling water underneath it, and then the bowl on top. But make sure you've kind of whisked through your sugar and everything first. And like I say, a pinch of salt is good too. If you want to add vanilla or anything like that, we add that later. So you don't really want to be adding it just yet. In England, all eggs, or at least supermarket eggs or something, are all the hens at least are vaccinated for salmonella, so you don't need to be too worried about it. But I still make sure that I heat mine with a thermometer to make sure I get to the correct temperature so that we are preventing any problems from eating the egg whites. So you would just need to aim for the right temperature. Going too much over it, you can scramble your egg, but you should be okay if you go a bit over. I've been over many times, and you don't really want to go under the temperature. So the temperature is depending on whether you're using Celsius or Fahrenheit. But mine's always in Fahrenheit on my thermometer because it won't let me change it. So you want to reach at least 160 Fahrenheit. I usually aim for about 165 Fahrenheit. I think in Celsius that's somewhere around 75 Celsius. So you can see I just whisk it on the hob and it becomes a bit thinner as you're cooking it down as the sugar melts away. If you don't have a thermometer, you can also look for when the sugar is not grainy anymore. But obviously it's best to make sure you're getting it to the correct temperature so that you can kind of see the grainy bit still. Once you have got that heated to the right temperature, you can pour it out of that bowl and into another heat-proof bowl so that you don't break it. But another bowl, and I pour it straight into my KitchenAid mixing bowl with the whisk attachment set. Using this saves so much time. You could use your hands and use a hand whisk, or you could use the handheld whisk machines. I used to use a handheld one and it took me so much longer, like beyond an amount longer. So this takes barely any time with the KitchenAid. So if you have a stand mixer, definitely use the stand mixer. You will save a lot of time and energy, and you can do other things whilst it's going. So you want to whisk this mixture now until you have peaks. It will be pretty thick. It will look almost meringue-like, kind of shiny, and most of the heat will be gone out of it. You'll see what I mean when I lift this up. And whilst that's going, you can measure out your butter. I'm gluten-free and dairy-free, and this is a gluten-free and dairy-free butter, as you can see. And you want to use about 452 grams of the butter. However, I tend to use less. I always use this block one, and I always find it uses less. If I use like a flour or something, it can even curdle, it doesn't melt the same, and it just causes kind of problems. There you can see the peaks I'm talking about. And you want to cut this into kind of tablespoon amounts. So because I tend to use this, I don't actually measure it, I just keep adding until I know it's the right consistency. But just for a roundabout amount, it's about 450 grams of butter. So this, again, if you're using a handheld mixer, this takes so much longer. But with a KitchenAid or a stand mixer, you can just leave, and you want it to fully incorporate each spoonful before you add more. So you can kind of wander off, add a spoonful, wander off, add a spoonful. And there I was just scraping down the sides of the bowls. And once it's mixed, you'll know. It kind of looks like it's not going to work out for a minute, and then at the end it completely comes together and looks perfect. And here you'll be able to see I've got my nice icing, and it sticks to the whisk and everything, so you know it's perfect to ice a cake with now. So if I'm doing a white-ish candle, I'm kind of doing like a yellowy candle. Obviously the buttercream has a bit of a yellowish tint. And then I'm doing a white chocolate, which also, because it's dairy-free, has quite a yellowish tint. So for that, we just make a ganache with some dairy-free whipping cream. But for now, we just need to set up the cake. So I have my cake, which I froze overnight and then put on the side, so it's quite cold because I want it to be quite cold when I'm icing it. And I'm just getting a bit of parchment paper so that I can put that down in the centre of my cake plate. I got this cake plate in a charity shop actually quite a while ago. But I don't want to ruin it with when I cut in with a knife and everything. So I just make sure it's pretty much centered, and then I use some icing to stick it down to the cake plate. So there's my 3 layers. You can see it's quite a small cake I'm doing. I wasn't having loads of people around, so there's no point making a huge cake. And now we're just going to fill up our icing bag. You can see it's nice and thick and super easy to pipe when we start to pipe it. We're not doing much intricate piping, but on this day, but usually it works like a dream. It's the best dairy-free buttercream I've found. So once it's in the pipe, because we're in the piping bag, because we're not using any tips or anything, I just cut off the bottom and we start putting the cake together, assembling the cake. I cover my icing to make sure it's all good whilst I'm not using it. And this is what we're going to fill it with. Just some hazelnut praline. You could just use buttercream, but I felt like having something a little bit different, so we've got vanilla cake with hazelnut in the middle. And this is dairy-free and gluten-free as well. And it's pretty good, this hazelnut spread. Although quite hard to open. And I love this cake plate I'm using. Like I said, I got it in a charity shop. I can't remember where it's from originally. It might have been Wedgwood. I can't remember. But it's super pretty. And I think it's called Harvest one or something like that. I looked it up once I'd found it. I just love it. It's perfect for kind of the autumn, fall time, and it's also great in kind of springtime, even winter, kind of the greenery, and yeah, it works for loads of different things. I have two cake plates now. I have a different one that I also used for a birthday cake, and I love both of them. I've become a cake plate person. I don't really like the cake boards. I find them kind of bland most of the time, and I'm not really a fan of some of the shiny ones either. But cake plates, they're great. You can reuse them, and they just, yeah, are really fun. A fun addition to the cake. It can really transform how a cake looks. But you can see on this one, we've got kind of some greenery, some grapes, some fun things. I'll admit that I did not center my piece of paper in the middle to protect it very well. And it does end up a slightly off center, but that's no one's fault but my own. So yeah, I use a bit of icing underneath it and on top of it just to make sure that the cake sticks to the cake plate, because you really don't want that accident happening when you make a really pretty cake and then it goes falling off and tumbling. And then yeah, these are still pretty much frozen, and then I'm going to pipe a ring around the edge, and then inside of that we'll add our hazelnut filling. This is probably like my favourite part of assembling a cake, adding the filling and doing the outer edge. I just think it's really fun. If you wanted it to be slightly easy, you could probably soften this down in the microwave, but it's not very difficult to do anyway. It's pretty much the same as Nutella. If you can eat Nutella, that would be pretty much the same comparison. I'm just using my spatula to kind of mix it, push it to the edges, and then we can add our next layer. So I'm doing a 3-layered cake. Like I said, it's a pretty small cake, but I want it to look like a candle, and candles don't tend to be huge, but you could do a huge cake like this, it would still look cool. And you could even do like a kind of fun pattern on the side or all sorts. When I looked them up, I saw so many cool ones, it was really great. I kind of just do a basic one on this day, just a simple candle, but you can definitely really take this to the next level. So we're only doing 2 layers of filling, and it did work perfectly in the cake. It tasted really good, the hazelnut praline and chocolate, but it's only 3 layers of cake, so we've only got 2 layers of filling. So after this we just add the cake layer. So we're all set to add the last layer. There we go. And now it's ready to ice. So I'm just using the same piping bag and just making sure the filling and middle parts are really filled with buttercream, and then I'm just going to kind of draw all over the cake with the white buttercream so that it is easy to smooth down. you could just splash it all on the top and then smooth it out. It doesn't need to be super smooth, to be honest, because it's a candle that's melted, so it's not super smooth. They're usually quite messy, but if you were looking to do it super smooth, I find this method easier of piping it on in rings, and then you can just smooth it out. It just makes it a little bit more even, in my experience at least. But you could do it whatever way makes sense for you. I think the fun part about doing this candle cake is it really does not need to look perfect. At first I was really stressing about everything, and then I realised that in the end it looks really great, because candles can look messy, especially if you're doing it for kind of a more Halloweeny or kind of spooky vibe. You want it to look a bit messy, so there's really no problem there. But even a Christmas candle I think would be such a fun idea. Maybe like a little piece of holly or something, or some greenery around it. That would be really pretty. So once we've got most of this filled in, I can use my spatula to even it out a bit. I don't make the ganache until I want to pretty much use it, because you don't want it to set too much before you try and drop it. I guess the negative of using a cake plate is you don't really want to scratch out the cake plate, but you could transfer it from one space to another. So now we're just smoothing out the icing. And we will make a divot at the top at the end to kind of show where the candle is melting. And this is a super enjoyable part of the process too. Especially if you don't need it to be perfectly clean and smooth. So I'll just fast forward through me kind of smoothing out some of the icing. I'm definitely not a pro at this, but I do it every so often, so I'm not completely awful either. I'd say some of the key parts is just making sure you've got enough icing on there, because if you don't have enough, it's so difficult. I'd say you can see we kind of dipped in at the top to make it look like it's melted, and got it higher at the edges. You can do just melt the buttercream down, let that cool for a bit, and then do a buttercream drift as well if you want it to exactly match the colour of your cake. But I wanted the melted wax to be a slightly different colour, so the white chocolate ganache really worked better for me. But we had loads of spare buttercream using the recipe that I used. So you could easily use that, melt that down a little bit in the microwave, let it cool off for a little while, and then drip that over. So now we can move on to making the ganache. So I completely messed up this recipe at first. I started with my normal ganache recipe, which is for milk chocolate, and that did not work because milk chocolate and white chocolate need a different amount of liquid to it. So honestly, I don't have a recipe for this, and you'd be better off looking one up than whatever recipe I would have made up. I don't even remember what the exact recipe was that I messed it up with to begin with. But I had a bunch of chocolate, added the cream, realised it was way too thin even after cooling for 10 minutes. So I had to keep melting chocolate and adding that in, which is not how you meant to do ganache. You're meant to do ganache with cold chocolate in a heat-proof bowl, and then add hot cream to it and mix, and then let it cool for a minute. But I had to do it a different way around because I messed up at first, which is fine, and it worked out fine in the end. But just a heads up, make sure you check that the ganache recipe is specific to the type of chocolate you're using. And you can see just how thin it is here, like it's just literally like a liquid, like a hot chocolate. It's not going to work for ganache, so we had to do some work on that, but I get it to a point where it's officially drippable, which helps. And then I do cover up my cake for a minute just to keep it safe. But when we come back to it, we can get our ganache on. I think I also should have let my ganache cool a little bit longer than I did. It was still quite runny, but that's probably also because, like I said, the ratios were off. If it was a bit thicker or a bit cooler, I think it would have been easier to drip. But that's just hindsight's 2020. So I think if you just had the correct ganache recipe, this wouldn't be a problem. I just pop it into a piping bag and then drip it down. You can see what I mean about how it's kind of the colour that melted wax does actually look like. This kind of yellowy colour, which I quite liked. But really it's just preference. And really the only trick here is just to keep dripping it down and then letting it cool off for a minute and then dripping more down until your desired point. It depends how melty you want it to look. Because mine was going for quite a Halloween-y vibe, I really wanted it to look quite spooky and melty. And I do add a little bit to the middle as well and kind of spread that around. At points I do also place the cake in the fridge for 5 minutes or so. Just a minute to let it, cool off, and then I add more to it. It's just fun, kind of work of just adding more until you like it. You don't have to do it specifically to anyone's standards, just adding it and adding it until it gets to a point that you think is good. That's what I did anyway. It doesn't turn out perfect, but it does get to a point where I'm like, yes, I like that, we'll keep it like that. And obviously the ganache is delicious too, so it tastes great on the cake. But you can see how, because it's quite thin, it does drip the whole way to the bottom of the cake. If it was a bit thicker or a bit cooler and thicker, I think then it would have clung to the cake more. Again, that's preference. Do you want it to look like the candle has completely melted or it's just starting to melt? So bear that in mind. So just continue to drip it around and around, and then I do place it in the fridge for a few minutes. But you can see it starts to pool at the bottom, which I quite enjoyed. I thought it was quite a fun effect. And I also made a ton of ganache, so that helped because I could do as much as I wanted because I had so much there. I use a spoon and my spatula to try and smooth out the middle part where my candle will go. So that you can see I'm taking it to the fridge. And when it comes out, this is what it looks like. And so I add more and more and just keep going with it until I like it. Obviously, the ganache cools a little bit more as time goes on, as I've left it out. So it does become a little bit more easy to work with, as in it kind of clings to the cake more, which is handy. So I just keep working it around the outer edge, letting it drip down and smoothing out the middle so that I can add my candle in the middle. But this is the point, if you're doing a Christmassy one, you might want to do a little thicker of a wax so it looks kind of more neat. And a pink one could look really nice for a birthday, or maybe for Christmas you could do a red one. Lots of ideas. Or a green one. And obviously because the ganache does drip down the cake, you can only see specks of the actual colour of the cake, so it does look more just cohesive. And as soon as I'm finished with how I want it to look, I would have popped it in the fridge, but I couldn't because there wasn't space. So I just had to put it on the side. But that was fine because it was a pretty cool day, so there was no melting or anything like that. Plus, it didn't matter too much if it melted slightly because that was kind of the effect we were going for, so it was fine. But I carry on going with that for a while. I think I do pop it in the fridge and then take it out again. And this is kind of it. At one point, I do work on it for a little bit longer and keep going with it until it gets to the point that I like it. But at this point, you can see it looks quite like a melted candle. And then I add the candle bit into the top, which is just the top of a normal birthday candle. You can just cut it off and then put it in there. So this is me lighting the candle for the first time. I do it twice because you can't see it as well on this camera, so I'll show you it on the other camera as well. But this is me lighting it for the first time, and it's a super cool effect. You can see I've got all the other candles around for this kind of Halloween-y time. So I light the candle, and it looks super cool. I wasn't sure how much I'd like it, but when it's lit, it looks so much like a spooky Halloween candle, so I loved it. And this is the filling.